Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Championship Game Preview Podcast. I'm Josh Welge here with Steve Soucie and Michael Welge, and we're a day away from Thanksgiving, which must mean it's time to talk some football. So I see in the forecast it's going to be high of the 20s this weekend in Bloomington, normal area. So it's great football weather. How are you guys doing as we look ahead to Friday and Saturday?
Looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an interesting weekend of games. I'm not sure how a few of them are going to play out, and some of the other ones, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. But it's always pretty intriguing because usually you get a lot of these matchups that you're not going to see in the regular season. So, and there are quite a few of them that have created that, and there are some really elite talents across the board. I mean, even into some of the smaller classifications. I'm not really accustomed to seeing two Power 5 D1 prospects in the 1A game, but that's what we're getting. It's I think there's a lot of really interesting individual talents over the course of the 8 games that we'll have the opportunity to see.
No doubt about that, guys. And Seuss, you brought it out, so I'll bring it out. We'll start with 1A and work our way up to the top to 8A. And Seuss, I tell you what, it's not every year. I mean, I think you get some good teams in 1A every year, but I'm not sure if there is the sizzle with this 1A game that there is in this particular game with Belleville Althoff and Lena Winslow. Obviously, Lena Winslow has been quite the regular here. I think this is their 5th championship game in a row, 19, 21, 22, 23. Yeah. They won 3 in a row. They lost last year to Camp Point Central. And then Althoff, a team that I think you and I and probably Michael too have been kind of following all year, sort of like we can't wait to see this team live, with the likes of Deer Hill and things like that. What do you make about this matchup? Just a lot of excitement for this one, I think.
Yeah, it's just really interesting because you kind of get into these games when in 1A, and like you mentioned, with Lena Winslow's track record, it's kind of a situation where you're like, they're not the favorite. And I don't necessarily think that Althoff is the, huge favorite in this game, but even the conversation that you're having, entering a 1A final where it seems like Lena Winslow has been in this final so many times over the last decade, and they're not the odds-on favorite here. That's pretty surprising in a lot of ways, and that's to Althoff's credit because there's just, like you mentioned, there's just talent on this football team that you don't typically see at the 1A level. You look at Deer Hill's statistics, the Oregon recruit. He had a 98-yard touchdown run in the semifinals, ran for almost 400 yards. It seems like that was happening a lot over the stretch of the postseason. Maybe not 400 yards, but a disgustingly high number. He's averaging almost 18 yards a carry. Think about that for a minute. I mean, that's just insane. So, there are just things about this team, and I haven't seen them as much on tape as I would have liked to. I did look a lot at them in week 9 when they're playing a 6A playoff team in Canelan. They didn't have Hill in that game, but this is not your prototypical Class 1A football team. But on the other side, you've got a Lena Winslow team that runs an offense that sometimes gives people a little bit of trouble. And I guarantee there's not a single person over on that Lena Winslow sideline that doesn't think that they can't win this football game against Althoff. And that usually makes for an interesting matchup.
And you mentioned Deer Hill averaging, 18 yards to carry or so. I looked at your story in a 1A game, and Lena Winslow has their own running back, Alec. I think his last name probably pronounced Schliesting. Yeah. He's averaging 14 yards a carry. So crazy stuff. And you mentioned a few times on this podcast that Lena Winslow, maybe during the regular season, there wasn't quite the dominance that we've seen in the past, but they've really turned it on in the playoffs.
Yeah, they've got a nice 1-2 punch in the backfield, and that, the way Lena Winslow runs their offense, it almost comes down to a guessing game because if you're not on the right guy, the other guy's going to burn you. So it becomes kind of this chess match in regards to trying to stop them because they run things so well. They run their system so well. They have such a great understanding of what they need to do to be successful. So, I think this is a game that could potentially be a high-scoring shootout because it looks like both teams have the potential to do that if things align.
And, similar to last week, Loyola, you don't like picking against them in a playoff game, but You do like Althoff in this game, though, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I do, but I'm not like there's a lot of games this weekend where I feel like I'm pretty confident in the team that I'm picking. That is not the case in 1A. I am not very confident that I am right in that situation. It's little more than a coin flip game to me on paper.
So a couple, real powerhouse programs in 1A and the 1A championship. 2A is a little bit different. I mean, Moreau, Forsyth, they're a team that you've seen quite a bit at state over the years, at the very least getting to the semifinals. They've had that run of getting to the semifinals. Chicago Christian, man, they're another story altogether. They've really, I thought they were going to be good this year. I did not think they were going to be playing on Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, it would have been hard to look at, what Chicago Christian has done in the past. And then even knowing that it looked like they were going to have a pretty good team this year, making that leap. I mean, I mentioned it a little bit on Monday's podcast in regards to Chicago Christian. They've won 4 playoff games this year, getting to the finals. In school history prior to this year, they'd won 6. So we're talking about a program that just simply is in rarefied air for it, getting to the final. So you just really don't have a track record to know how they respond. But they're a fascinating team. You kind of look at what they've done all year long and how they've done it. It's a very senior-dominated football team. I believe there are 8 players that start on both sides of the ball. And I know that happens sometimes at the small school level, but maybe not quite to that level. I mean, it's about as close to Ironman football as you're going to get. I mean, they have multiple players that literally do not leave the field, offense, defense, special teams. They are on for every single play. And in some ways, I think that's pretty cool. But in some ways, it gives me a little bit of pause for how they might deal with a Maroa Forsyth team that really likes to crank up the tempo, high octane, take as many snaps as they can get off. And in that sense, that might be a problem for Chicago Christian with so many guys that they rely on to be out there so much.
And you mentioned some of the, high-end Division I talent in a 1A game. I mean, the same thing in 2A with Maroa Forsyth. They have Grant Smith. He's a tight end linebacker, I believe, going to U of I. He's got, I think 18 touchdowns this year. So obviously he's going to be a guy that keep an eye on. And like you said, a Maroa Forsyth team that really plays that up-tempo style.
Well, he's another one of those two-way guys, too. He's got 18 touchdowns. He's also got 100-plus tackles on the defensive side of the ball. So he's probably going to be everywhere for Maroa Forsyth. You're going to hear that name called a lot on both sides of the football. But he's by far not the only weapon that this team has. They really like to air it out, but they can run the football and run it effectively. So it's a high-powered team, and you would kind of expect that. This is their 10th final since 2006. So they know how to get there. They haven't maybe had the success level in the actual title game that they wanted to, but it's a very pedigreed program that understands what it wants to do.
Kind of makes them, I think Chicago Christian, if they were able to finish it off and win a state championship, my God, that'd be one of the better stories of the weekend. But man, with Maroa Forsyth, their experience, their talent level, it's kind of hard to go against them in this game.
Yeah, it is. It's just like all the things that we talked about, like building up to this point. Maroa Forsyth, I think, is the favorite here. The underdog story in me is pulling for Chicago Christian a little bit to finish the job. But I think it will be intriguing to see how it plays out. I think Maroa is a favored team here, but it would not surprise me if Chicago Christian comes in there, devil may care attitude and put it out there all on the line and see what happens, because they have some really talented players in their own right. We didn't really go into them specifically, but there are some guys on that team that can break some plays and make some things happen.
3A matchup as Montini playing Monticello. Montini is a program that, I mean, guys, last decade, Montini was like every year they were at state, either winning it or more often than not winning it, or taking second. But it's been a little bit of a while, Michael and Soucie, they got in that CCL ESCC and just the grind of that conference. And, I think, enrollment numbers a little bit down, and, they lost a few players that were with the program, but, they really came back in a big way last year to get to the semifinals. And then they took the next step this year. And Michael, they do it with a very experienced defense. I talked to Nicky Castaldo, defensive tackle. He's one of those guys. They think they have 10 guys that were starters or played a lot as sophomores, and that experience has really shown.
It really has. And, kind of looking at, we get these team info and stats, all that kind of stuff that you don't really get throughout the season. And when you look at it, I mean, Montini's only given up 13 points in the first quarter throughout the entire season. And that's huge, right? Just being able to kind of limit your opponents from what they want to do at the beginning. I know those numbers are sometimes skewed based on who you're playing, but I mean, that alone just kind of says how much experience you have, just being able to start off from the beginning and limit your opponents from really building a lead or, building any sort of confidence. And you've seen that throughout the year where they've been able to get big stops. They were able to limit opponents from really getting damage. And, that also comes from having an explosive offense to go along with an experienced defense. But I mean, that defense has just really limited opponents for much of the season. And when they have broken this year, I mean, it's come against some of the best teams in the state, obviously, when they've competed in their CCLE SEC schedule.
And then, on the offensive side, I mean, there was a few games early in the year where they played in some low-scoring games. I think Fenwick was a really low-scoring loss where, the offense didn't quite, rise to the level that defense is at. But, they made a few tweaks. Early in the year, I believe they were rotating quarterbacks. They went to the sophomore, Israel Abrams, full-time. He's got an offer from Iowa State, I believe. Really talented, kind of dual-threat kid, good arm, can run the ball. And then, Jeremiah Peterson, I mean, he was their middle linebacker last year. They had a few injuries at running back, and now he's taken over. And Mike, Soucie, you talked about him as a battering ram type running back. He is every bit a battering ram running back. He is a load. He is very difficult to bring down.
Yeah, you just kind of get that feel, even though you look at the stats and they haven't overworked him by any sense of the imagination in terms of carries or things like that. But if Montini gets into a grind it out type of football game where they need to put together a 12-play, 14-play drive to kind of keep the opponent from carrying the ball or taking control of the game tempo-wise, that's an asset that they definitely have. They have a guy that they can just say, okay, we're going to grind 6 minutes off this clock and see what happens. They can just work the ball to him, and usually that works to their advantage.
On the other side, Monticello, there is a little familiarity there. It hasn't been that long since they're in the state championship game. And then Soucie, they've had a few games along the way that it's kind of like, you hate to say it's Destiny's Darlings type of thing, but it is a little bit like that. I mean, they had a close quarterfinal game. They had that kind of crazy finish against Tolona Unity, and they got a really good offensive player. Actually, he's a two-way player. Ike Young, I think he's a baseball recruit for Illinois. Something crazy. He's accounted like 4,000 yards of offense, over 40 touchdowns.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where I think it's going to be interesting to see what factor the weather plays this weekend, because Monticello is kind of a freewheeling offensive team, and they need to be able to do all the things that are in their offense, especially against this Montini defense that has not cracked against a lot of quality opponents. So Montini needs to have all the tools at its disposal to really make a run at Montini. It'll be interesting to see if the weather has maybe an impact on whether or not they're able to access every page in their playbook, because over time, if you watch the Monticello program, under Cully Welter, it's a creative program. They do creative things. I'm sure they're going to have some things in their bag that they're going to roll out specifically for this week in an attempt to, maybe pull a rabbit out of their hat in certain situations. But will the surrounding conditions allow those things to happen? That's going to be interesting to watch.
And with respect to Monticello, they might need a little bit of a rabbit out of their hat. I mean, Montini, I think after that Byron game was kind of like, all right, whoever comes out of that is going to be the prohibitive favorite to win 3A. And I think that still bears out when you're talking about an experienced defense, a good running game, a talented quarterback, albeit a young quarterback. So we'll see how he does, circumstances. But, it's hard to go against Montini in this game.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it really does look like you said, that Montini Byron game was kind of the prelude to the actual state championship game. That's been the situation that it's kind of been for the last 2 years, with Byron winning last year's game and then rolling over everyone else along the way. So, I think Montini is a clear favorite in this game. And I'm interested to see how Monticello tries to attack this defense, because I think regardless of class, I think this is a really, really good defensive unit. And it's shown throughout their very difficult schedule.
The 4A championship game, which is Friday night, 7:00, give or take. Interesting game. Two teams that I don't know, the being a year, Soucie or Michael, we would have said, all right, I got DePaul Prep against Mount Zion in the 4A championship game. I think we could have probably won a few bets with that one with respect to those programs. But, Michael, I'll start with DePaul Prep. Why are they here? What has put them in position to do this? Because, it's been a long time since, well, not that school. The previous iteration of it, Gordon Tech has been in a championship game.
Yeah, it just kind of feels like they're on a heater if we're sticking with like gambling terms and that kind of stuff. It just feels like this group, they were able to eke out a 26-14 win over St. Lawrence in the quarterfinals. They continued that momentum in the semifinals to get past Cole City 21-14. I think this is an experienced group which is funny to say for a group that obviously, is back in the playoffs for the first time since 2015 and won its first playoff game since, 2005 when it was Gordon Tech, right? So, this team hasn't been here too often, but it seems like it's got experience and doesn't really buckle under pressure. You've got a pretty dominant rusher in, Nick Martinez. He's really stable. He really gives them a bunch of, chunk yards here or there. You've got a really stout defense where, yes, there are some talented players that can maybe lead you, but it does feel like it's a whole effort as opposed to one guy. And you got a dual threat quarterback who can, scramble, who can pick up yards, who can, sometimes maybe he doesn't make the right throw or, takes a sack. But you've got a quarterback that can kind of keep you alive. And that kind of is the common theme here in the playoffs, right? You talked about Abram for Montini. Juju Rodriguez kind of does the same thing for DePaul, where he just keeps plays alive and finds players open that maybe when the play would have been done 4 or 5 seconds ago, he's able to kind of keep it alive. So that kind of makes them a dynamic offense that kind of makes it, fairly difficult to stop.
On the other side, Soucie, Mount Zion, I mean, I think they're 3-3 at one point this year. So probably wondered if they were going to, even get to the playoffs at that point. And then, getting this far, I don't think we necessarily expected them to win, their last week's game. But they got a lot of big time talent on their team as well. When you're talking about high Division I recruit caliber players.
Well, this was a team that at the beginning of the season, I was pretty high on, to be completely honest with you, because of the things that they have that you just mentioned. I mean, tight end J.C. Anderson is a junior who's being recruited by every major collegiate program in the nation. Wide receiver Braden Trimble is kind of, I think I referred to him earlier in the week as the Swiss Army knife of the Mount Zion offense. He pretty much does whatever they need him to do at any time. He's a U of I recruit. These guys can really do it, and it was really confusing to me early in the season why they were having so much trouble, kind of getting some momentum going. I found out through the grapevine that there were some health issues. They had some key guys that were hurt. It appears now that they're putting their best foot forward and they're playing their best football at the right time. So, knowing all those things in concert, I can see how they got here. Not knowing those things 6 to 8 weeks ago, I would have been surprised that they were here based on their early season results. But Michael mentioned DePaul Prep on a heater. I think some of the same can be said about Mount Zion.
So this is a matchup that, number one, I don't know these teams as well as some of the other teams at state. And I also like this matchup because I don't know what's going to happen. I could see either of these teams coming out on top. And I don't know if I could say that about some games this weekend.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think this is definitely one of them that creates one of those matchups that I talked about at the beginning of the podcast here. It creates a pairing of two teams that we would never have said, hey, this is a game that we're going to get at this point in the season. Because like you said, if we would have said at the beginning of the year, our 4A finalists are DePaul Prep and Mount Zion, I would have given you one of these. I mean, it would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about here. I maybe would have bought into Mount Zion a little bit. DePaul, let's look at their track record, just to be honest. They haven't even been in the playoffs since 2015. So that would have been a large leap to have to make. So this is a really intriguing story on both sides. I'll say that.
I would have been like DePaul Prep. Are we talking basketball here? Or are we talking football? I know they got a really good basketball program. I did not know so much about football, but great stuff. Looking forward to it on Friday. Guys, Saturday, if there's one theme, I think, is rematches. There's some programs with a lot of familiarity in recent years. And I'll start with that 5A game, Nazareth, Joliet Catholic. They obviously faced each other last year in a game that, the final score really is not indicative of the kind of game that was. That was a close game for a good part of the game. JC actually led at half. And then this year, interesting game. It was a low-scoring game, 16-13, I think Naz won. And I tell you what, Michael, if Joliet Catholic can get it to be a 16-13 game on Saturday, I think they'll take that.
Yeah, I mean, I covered that game, and it was for a while there. I mean, it was just a rock fight. I mean, it was just pretty much, who was going to, run the ball really well, who was going to pick up 5 or 6 yards and that kind of stuff. And the difference in the game were 2 explosive throws from Logan Malachuk, and they were able to pick up the win there and kind of hold on at the end to kind of turn away a late Joliet Catholic push. But obviously these teams are different than they were, and whenever they met, I think it was like week 5. So these are 2 different teams, the same way that they're different teams from last year's team. But I am curious to know just kind of how much familiarity plays into this thing. Obviously, these 2 teams saw each other last year's championship. They saw each other in week 5. The talent is a little different, but it's fairly the same. I mean, Joliet Catholic is going to run the ball. They've got a great offensive and defensive line. Nazareth has explosive skill players who can make plays, right? So I'm really interested to see how much do you take from that week 5 game plan, and do you apply it to this? And how do you kind of take away, Trenton Walker from making an explosive catch? How do you get to Logan Malachuk? Because not many programs have done a good job of trying to get him. How much is, Joliet Catholic looking at the Mount Carmel tape with the understanding that obviously we don't have Mount Carmel, but what can we do to kind of eliminate that? And I think the obvious thing is take away the passing lanes, force Nazareth to run. And if you can stop them from running it, I think Joliet Catholic can make this a really competitive game.
So it's interesting mix of styles. Joliet Catholic, from everything I'm reading about, huge offensive line, running the football. Nazareth getting into the outside with multiple receivers. You saw it last week. You were at the game against St. Francis. St. Francis had difficulty containing the big play. Joliet Catholic had difficulty containing the big play in last year's championship game. I remember James Penley had a huge game for Nazareth last year. And honestly, James Penley, he's like their second or third best. He's like their second or third leading receiver on this team. I mean, they have so many weapons. Trenton Walker, as Michael alluded to, has emerged as a really big time threat for Nazareth as well.
I think the thing that's most intriguing to me about how this game will play out is I think Joliet Catholic's defense has been playing really, really well since that initial meeting between the 2 schools. Not that they didn't they already held Nazareth to the fewest points that they'd scored all season. But since then, I feel like Joliet Catholic's defense has been really, really good. And I don't know if that's a product of great improvement or the product of the fact that maybe their bracket was not very strong. Because I think it might be a combination of the 2, because that defense, especially in the playoffs, has played incredibly well. Not only are they not allowing points, they've only allowed 20 points through 4 playoff games. They're not allowing yardage. I mean, they are sending teams off at an incredible rate of 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, get the ball, run the other way, score. I mean, that's just what they've been doing for the better part of 6 weeks right now. That's just what they've been doing on defense, on the defensive side of the ball. Is that a product of schedule? Is that a product of actual attainable performance level going up? I don't know the answer to that. We're going to find out on Saturday morning.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't like picking against the Joliet Catholic program, but that being said, I don't know, Suze, it's hard for me to imagine these Nazareth seniors not going out on top, and just the way they're playing right now in the playoffs leads me to believe that they're the favorite going into Saturday.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I do think, for a frame of reference, I think this has the potential to be the most intriguing game of all 8, in just the way that I think it may play out.
6-8 game. East St. Louis is not playing Cary Grove, and they're pretty happy about that. But Geneva's pretty good as well. Suze, first of all, East St. Louis, what do you make about this team? I mean, they're a team that, it's sort of like we hear about them like in a sort of a mythical aura sense throughout the year. And then once or twice a year, we get to see them live, and we love to do that.
Well, Michael and I saw them back in week 1, and I know we both walked away very impressed with what we saw, and that was just week 1. And all this team has done since then is get better. And that's pretty alarming when you start to think about how good they looked in week 1 and they keep getting better. They have absolutely demolished everyone in the playoffs at this point. In my heart of hearts, I was kind of hoping for another Cary Grove matchup just because I wanted to see if they could do it again against this team. Because, boy, especially defensively, East St. Louis just looks incredible. They're so fast to the ball. They don't seem to be – they look a little undersized, but it does not convert over to the field. That's one of the things that I think I've noticed about them. Loyola had a huge offensive line, and that did not detain East St. Louis from doing pretty much whatever they wanted to do defensively in that game. So this is a really, really good football team. They're a little bit different offensively than what you're used to. It is not we're looking for the quick 60, 80-yard touchdown pass hitter. They will kind of dink and dunk you down the field and take you apart that way. They have an army of running backs that they use. It's not exactly the prototypical East St. Louis team, but I think it's one of the more intriguing ones that we've had the opportunity to watch.
And you mentioned their defense too. I mean, to me, that is the sort of the interesting power on power matchup for this game is East St. Louis defense sounds so good. Geneva's offense has just been fantastic all year. Tony Jahino has just been a revelation for them as a quarterback in the first year start. He's thrown 46, 47 touchdowns, 4,000 yards. Talon Taylor, the Georgia recruit, one of the best receivers probably the best receiver in the state. And then they have a lot of other guys. Can Geneva put up points against this East St. Louis team? Because they're probably going to have to give themselves a chance to win this game or be competitive.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be a 10-7 football game. That I'm pretty sure of. So that's one of those things where I feel like you're right. I think they're going to have to figure out a way to get some points on the board, and they might get used to like having to do that in a different way than they're used to. And when I say that, they're not going to have a lot of time for downfield plays to develop. They're going to have to get the ball in the hands of their playmakers quickly. And East St. Louis on the other side has a very talented secondary that closes up windows really, really fast. So the decision-making is going to have to be quick and assertive and put in the right place, because if mistakes are made in those areas, East St. Louis will make you pay.
So I've been wrong this year to pick against Geneva on a few occasions, namely Batavia and that Cary Grove game. But, man, it's hard to pick against East St. Louis in this game just with what they bring to the table.
Yeah, I can't.
Michael's shaking his head.
Yeah, well, I think like if I know, obviously I don't cover either one of these teams, but I think the thing that makes that East St. Louis so special, and I was thinking about this, like, would today's Loyola team beat East St. Louis? And I still feel like no, just based on, their offense is explosive, but that defense is just so physical, and they're able to get to you so quickly. They put on a strong hit. The athleticism on that defensive line was insane for week one. And it's just so hard to protect. Loyola obviously was still trying to figure out its offensive line, but listen, like that defensive front is so physical and so quick where you don't really have too much time to make decisions offensively. And by the time they get to you, they're going to lay a hit on you, fully legal, but they're going to make you feel that they're there. So for how much, everyone loves this offense. I mean, I love this defense. This defense was, one of the better defenses I've seen the entire season, and it was only week one.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
There's definitely guys that are just really, really enjoyable to watch on this defense just from what they're able to do. The linebacker Keandre McClendon is just an absolute beast. Yeah. And then, you look around that roster, and the guy that I think is just kind of their spark plug and just get stuff done. Elmo Gilliam Jr. is a kid that literally, it felt like in that Loyola game, he was in on every freaking play. I mean, that's just, those two guys from the linebacker position are just flying all over the place, and you might be able to contain one of them, but good luck trying to keep both of them away. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation.
No doubt. You guys were fortunate enough to see that team in week one. I'm really looking forward to seeing them this weekend against Geneva in that 6A game. 7A game, again, a lot of familiarity there. Mount Carmel playing Batavia. This is the fourth year in a row these two programs have met. Mount Carmel has, of course, won the first three meetings. And Michael, Mount Carmel, if there's a team peaking at the right time, they look at the part. I mean, you saw them against St. Rita, and they really kind of took it to St. Rita.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, and this will go into our next two classes what we're talking about here, but a healthy quarterback is really important to your team's success, right? And that's kind of what you've seen with Jack Elliott. I mean, he's back to being 100%, or probably not 100%. No one's 100% at this point, but he's explosive. He's healthy. He's able to run the ball, and he has a good relationship with his wide receivers. That's not to say that he didn't have one at the beginning of the year, but all three of his top receivers were new to the team. You had Cooper Liam, who came over from Nico Valley, a senior. You have Quentin Perrell, a sophomore. And then you had Marshawn Thornton, who came in as a freshman toward the end of the year. And all three of those threats are just explosive. You're able to run the ball. He's able to connect with a lot of them. Obviously, Jordan Lynch is going to scheme up a good offense. But I've covered a bunch of, Mount Carmel games this year. And every opposing coach says that Jack Elliott is the best player in the state. He's dynamic. He can throw the ball perfectly. He can run the ball. He knows how to run that offense. He's a perfect quarterback for Jordan Lynch. And Batavia, I'm sure, obviously they've had their rivalry the last couple of years. They went to Mount Carmel, brought the one town, one team banner, and that started the whole thing. But this is not an offense that I would want to face if I was any team right now.
No doubt about that. And Soucie, on the other side, Batavia is a team that, going all the way back to week one, I saw them at Glenbard West, a game they actually won. And I really wondered if they were a Batavia team that was capable of making a run like that. No disrespect to the Batavia program. I have the utmost respect, but I really wondered if they had a team that can make this far because they leaned so heavily on Nathan Whitwell, the running back, in their defense. But man, they have found magic in the playoffs with the rotating quarterback, specifically the sophomore Michael Vanderleeuwen-Guerin. You were there for that second round game where they pulled the rabbit out of their hat at Lincoln Way West, and then they went down to another Lincoln Way school last weekend, and Michael Vanderleeuwen-Guerin led, I think, like an 85-yard drive in the last couple of minutes with a touchdown to Isaiah Brown. They've really found something in the playoffs, and they've made them a more dangerous team. The fact that they don't just lean so heavily on Nathan Whitwell, even though he's their main guy.
They've just, and I've talked about this a lot kind of during this playoff run, they've done a really excellent job of recognizing what it's going to take and what sort of game plan is going to be to their best advantage through this playoff run. You go back to round two, they had a disaster of a first half, went in and they downplayed it, but whatever they adjusted at halftime, all of it worked. It was, it might have been one of the more closest to perfect halves on both sides of the football I think I've ever seen a team play, both on offense and defense. Everything they did worked in that second half to win the game over Lincoln Way West. It was, and they needed it all because they didn't actually win that game until the final minute. So, and then you go to the next round, they figured out that, hey, we got to go old school here. They gave the ball to Whitwell a whole bunch of times, and they beat Downers Grove North. Then they switched gears again in the semifinals. It's just a team that has done a remarkable job of morphing into the best version of themselves for the situation that they have at hand. So I don't know if they're going to be able to do that again here because, as we mentioned prior, this is an awfully big beast that they have to deal with here in Mount Carmel. And their track record, to be honest, against Mount Carmel, the last 4 seasons, they've ended their postseason. Batavia's ended the postseason runs at the hands of Mount Carmel, and the last 3 have not gone very well for Batavia. So a large bridge has to be cleared. And circling back to Mount Carmel for a moment, this is a little bit off topic, and Michael, maybe you can speak to this. I saw some videos this week from one of the freshmen that you mentioned, Thornton, and another freshman that they have on the defensive line. What exactly are they feeding the 14 and 15-year-olds in Mount Carmel? My goodness, especially Caleb Tucker. Oh my gosh, I couldn't even believe that particular individual was a freshman in high school.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why they call him the Bone Crusher. That's his nickname as a freshman. I only got a chance to see him last week because he was obviously on the freshman team throughout the year. But he joined the squad after, and you could tell he's 330 pounds, 6'4", but he glides. I saw Jordan Lynch talk about this in his teleconference, but he carries it well as you can hold 330 pounds for a freshman. So I mean, yeah, I don't know what you're supposed to do when you got that, and then Braden Jones, a junior who's going to USC. That's just a tough matchup you got defensively, just trying to stop those huge, versatile bodies that they have.
So, guys, for me, the key from this game is can Batavia, especially the outset, can they just slow Mount Carmel's offense down? Because a couple years ago, the 2021 game, that was a game at Mount Carmel that came down to the wire, sort of a controversial finish. The last 2 years have not been close games, particularly last year. And I think the big part is that they have just not been able to slow down Mount Carmel's up-tempo playmakers on offense. They just have not been able to do it. Can they this time? I don't know if they can.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is going to be, can you stop Jack Elliott, right? I mean, that's just going to can you take that? I mean, Loyola was able to do it by taking away his passing lanes. And he said, he's talked about how that Loyola game really helped the offense click and figure things out here for the playoffs. I feel like I get that quote every single year, but if you can stop Jack Elliott or do anything to him, stop him from running, take away passing lanes, that's the only way you're going to stop this offense because, as far as Jack Elliott goes, that's as far as this offense is going to go. And if he's going to run past you, if he's going to throw a 70-yard bomb down the field, I don't think that there's really much of a competition here.
The 8A final, another game between teams that have seen each other quite a bit in the playoffs in recent years. Loyola playing York. Loyola, of course, the two-time defending state champion. They've beaten York in the last 2 semifinals. Now they play each other in the final. And Michael, Loyola, again, like some of these other programs like Mount Carmel, there's times where all right, just how good are they? Are they going to be able to be up to what they've been in the past? Man, they have answered all questions late in the year. Obviously, that Lincoln Way East game was huge for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is like we talked about with Mount Carmel and Jack Elliott. You see how good Loyola is with a healthy Ryan Fitzgerald, right? Obviously in week 1 against East St. Louis, that team was still trying to figure things out. New offensive line, obviously the defensive line, obviously East St. Louis is a great team. Those are all factors in that game. And then that loss to St. Francis in week 3, Ryan Fitzgerald didn't play. And he's been kind of limited throughout the year with the hamstring injury. Kind of showed that he was kind of healthy in that Mount Carmel game where they blew out Mount Carmel. And in the playoffs, you've just seen how versatile and important he's been where, against Lincoln Way East, obviously Loyola's defense did really well, but it also was because Loyola just drove down the field and took away time and took away possessions where Jonas Williams didn't have the time to make the plays, right? Because he wasn't on the field. So I think that's the biggest thing where you've got a threat in Ryan Fitzgerald when he's finally healthy that he'll throw you a bomb. He'll throw you a 10-yard pass to pick up a first down, but he's also going to barrel into your best linebacker and pick up a first down. He's not afraid to run. And you see just how different and good this offense is with Ryan Fitzgerald being to as close as healthy as you could be heading into championship weekend.
Yeah, so there's some offenses this weekend that kind of go through the running back, go the receiver, whatever. These two teams, clearly, it all starts with the quarterbacks. I mean, Ryan Fitzgerald running the football, throwing the football, doing whatever he does. And my God, Soucie, Bruno Masso, if there's a kid that's had a better playoffs than that young man, I mean, he has just turned it on. I think, running for over about 150 yards every week, making huge throws whenever they need them. He is just really, he's been one of the best stories of the playoffs. He's been great.
Yeah, he really has. And you and I have talked about this a lot during York's playoff run in regards to maybe underestimating what they were capable of and whether or not, this run was even possible. Because I think both of us were kind of aligned with, maybe they'll win a game or two here, but thought that the road eventually one of these teams was going to get them. And in reality, that just simply has not happened. And a lot of that has to do with his play. The fact that he just continues to make play after play after play in the sense that, if there was a team that was going to challenge them, you felt like he had another loop on his belt, another trick that he could pull out of there and get it done for them because he has just really been great, especially in the postseason. Numbers bear that out. You saw the kind of playmaker that he is, even though it was technically a negative play, the way that they rounded out that semifinal game is, he was able to use the tools that he has in his belt to just run the rest of that clock out so they didn't have to worry about punting, a bad snap or any of those other things. Took that safety. It was a smart play. ended up finishing out the game and it completely alleviated any risk that they might have had of releasing that ball back to Naperville Central.
Yeah, and he also had another play earlier in the fourth quarter where, I mean, they were up by 3 or 1. It was only a 1 or 2, and it was a 4th down play or 3rd down and long, and he just made a long throw off of 1 foot just on a dime. He's not a guy that's going to make a lot of throws for them, but it seems like when they need him to make throws, he does. And obviously that's the same way for Ryan Fitzgerald. To me, guys, one of the big things is, it's hard for Loyola to get their offense off the football field. Lincoln Way East really struggled to do that. For me, for York to have a chance, can they get Loyola's offense off the field, and can they stay on the field?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a situation where, I think York needs to try to stay on the field. And after witnessing what I witnessed in the Lincoln Way East game last week, keeping Loyola off the field is a much bigger challenge moving forward into this game. I mean, I wish I would have. I didn't track time of possession in the second half of that game, but I'm sure the gap was astonishingly wide. I mean, Loyola opened the second half with a monster drive, a 14-play drive. They had another drive right out after that closed out the third quarter that I was actually shocked was ended by an interception that Ryan Fitzgerald threw, because I seriously don't think he made a single bad decision other than that pass over the entire second half. He always seemed to make the best choice. Whatever the choices were available to him, he picked the best one other than that one pass. So, I mean, keeping him from being able to engineer drives like that is the biggest challenge York faces, in my opinion.
Yeah. Either way, we're going to see history, guys. I mean, York has never won a state championship. They've never been in a state final. Loyola, on the other hand, they win 3 8A titles in a row. Pretty impressive.
Yep.
Whatever you want to say about Loyola, pretty impressive. They can do that.
Especially in 8A, I would say, just based on
8A. Exactly.
I mean, the last team to do it was Maine South in the late 2000s, and you don't see that too often anymore.
Nope. You don't. Going to be a lot of fun, guys. We're going to be there all weekend. Everybody catch up on Friday Night Drive. We got a lot of stuff, features, previews, what have you ahead of it. And then Michael, Soucie, and I will both be here both days this weekend. For Michael DeWojak and Steve Soucie, I'm Josh Welge. Everyone have a great Wednesday and a great Thanksgiving.